Let's kick it off. First of all, thank you again for joining us. My name is Will Neville Rabin. I'm co-executive director and executive editor of Tory House Press. We have had the honor of working with Stacie Denetsosie in the lead up to the launch tomorrow of her debut short fiction collection, The Missing Morningstar and Other Stories. It's a spectacular book. We are thrilled to be here celebrating Stacie and celebrating the release of this wonderful book tonight. And we're also honored to be joined by Kali Fajardo-Anstine, who is here with us and is the author of Woman of Light, as well as other wonderful things. I'm excited to listen to these two brilliant writers, both of whom I have read and both of whom I really adore on the page. And I'm excited that we get to spend some time with them this evening. As we get started, I want to acknowledge that I'm joining you tonight from the homelands of the Ute, Goshute, Shoshone, and Paiute peoples. And I invite you to learn about the Native people in your home ground as well. Stacie, we're going to let you start us off with a reading from The Missing Morningstar and Other Stories.
All right, so I'm reading from the title story, The Missing Morningstar. Across the checkout counter, the gas station lights gleamed off of the thousands of hand-cut beads sewn into the soft buckskin of her regalia. And she looked like a straight-up powwow goddess. Like if Venus were Navajo, she'd be Charmaine. Her hair was oil slicked as if she had been as if she had christened her head with holy Crisco shortening. Nothing showing but a sliver of her moon-white scalp. Charmaine Morningstar was the third Morningstar to win the title of Miss Northwestern Arizona. When she wasn't wearing her sterling silver crown, she kept it in a glass shelf in her grandfather's trailer beside her grandmother's and her mother's crowns, gourds, and ceremonial fans. The Morningstars all looked the same, carbon copies of the previous generation before them. Someone way back, way before the census, before half or whole Indians, said that one of the Morningstar women had a baby with a Chinese railroad worker. And that's why all the Morningstar women looked kind of Asian. They all shared those high cheekbones, monolids, and skinny waists. They were tiny, but they were also the meanest, raunchiest, and dirtiest women in all of K-Town. All the men wanted to snag them, and all the women wanted to either be them or witch them. Once Charmaine turned 14, rumors started that she was sleeping around. That girl was rumored to have every STD before 16. Chlamydia, herpes, gonorrhea, pubic lice, the list goes on. Some even said she had syphilis, but you don't joke around with Indians having syphilis. But for me, I knew. I knew that Charmaine wasn't sleeping around with no men. She was in the powwow circuit. She had spent a lot of time around other female dancers, jingle dress dancers, butterfly dancers, and other traditional style dancers like herself. And I was friends with a lot of them on Facebook, and even Charmaine herself. She liked her partners softer, smoother, and better smelling than men. I guess I preferred that too. In old Navajo culture, an LGBT person is known as a Nadlehi, which means one who changes. But more recently, natives in the LGBT community were reclaiming the term two-spirit. Some forums that I read online said that traditionally my people believed in 4 genders, which were all pretty fluid. Apparently, my ancestors were breaking up that binary gender shit before the colonizers even arrived, which I thought was pretty cool. And after some expert Googling on my high school's Wi-Fi, I discovered the term that I felt fit me best, dilba, which meant masculine female. I tried asking my mother about it at a diner once. I knew she knew what dilba meant. And I wondered if she knew what dilba meant, and she said yes, but continued to dip her complimentary yeast roll in her black coffee. I remember the scent of the coffee on my mother's breath washing over my face. I asked her if she knew any stories about the dilba. I'd found one on Google that I had never heard. I asked my mom, hoping that she acknowledged me. I wanted her to acknowledge me. No, I don't know no stories about them, she said, and that's when our food arrived.
Thank you so much, Stacie. Wow. I mean, I haven't heard you read before. This is my first time hearing your words in your words, and it's so beautiful. And I wanted to begin a little bit by saying how we met and how I came to be even talking to you tonight. And I think it was AWP last year in Seattle. and you came up to my table. I was signing books, and you told me that you had a book coming out, and I had like a little bit of like fear of missing out. I was like, wait, what is this book? Like, how come I haven't heard of this? Send this to me. And you did. You sent it to me right away. I got to read an early copy, and I was just so blown away. And I felt so at home. I've been traveling so much for my books and being away from the American West, being away from Indigenous people, being away from our lands and our mountains. And your characters just embraced me and made me feel like I was right back there. And I just felt like there's a new important voice in town, and I'm so excited that I got to read it early. And I'm excited to talk to you tonight. So like, first of all, congratulations. It's like the eve of your pub day. Like, how are you feeling? What is going on?
I feel great. I also feel kind of crazy. But that's a good thing. And whenever I think about my launch, I imagine myself like flying out of like a little cannon or something like that. And it's so exciting because like the lead up to it is so long, and I didn't know that before when I was in school. So I feel like I've been waiting for this moment for 2 years, and it's finally here. And so I'm super, super happy.
Yeah. So, I mean, it is such a long lead up. And I think a lot of people, like I've written 2 books, and people are like, well, where's the next one? And even if I had a new one to like turn in tomorrow, it wouldn't be out tomorrow. So could you talk a little bit about like how this all came to be? Like, how did you come up with the idea for the book? When did you start writing it? But then also, I mean, I think people would be curious about the process of getting it published. But first, let's start with the ideas.
Yeah. So The Missing Morningstar and Other Stories is it is a collection of short stories that I've been working on all throughout like my undergraduate and graduate school times. So some of the stories like Reservation State of Mind are from my undergrad, and then the rest of them are from my programs at Utah State and IAIA. And part of writing them was, I guess, freshly in my undergrad, I thought about I wrote a lot of stories, but I never wrote any stories about like my own people because I had never seen us be the protagonists. And I also didn't read a lot of like female authored Indigenous literature at that point. And so when I started writing, it was just all these stories that I heard by mouth, either from my mother or just things that I read in the newspaper about home, or just things in passing that caught my imagination. And I just asked myself, like, I wonder what would happen if this situation happened here. Like in the case of the first story, Dormant, if a girl ended up dating this guy who's her teacher, like that's, I don't know. There's so many stories that happen all around me, and I feel like they're all very ordinary. And people might describe them as mundane, but I just find them so intriguing because there's just such complex individuals in all of them. And I just want to see where they go, and they just start talking to me. And so then I start writing down their stories.
I think that's so fascinating that you'd say like they're ordinary or they're mundane, so to speak, because like I think in the ordinary, especially like in your work, like the ordinary is what makes them so vibrant and gorgeous and sparkly, because within that ordinary is the universal, but also like their specific souls. And I could feel them constantly while I was reading the book. And so I guess like going back to like the ideas of where these came from, what, like, do you remember like the moment when you're like, I'm going to put my own people in stories? And like, do you remember like the kinds of stories you were writing before they were your own people? Like, I'm just curious.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. So before the stories that I was writing were like, it was the time of like Hunger Games and like really big sci-fi. And I had just graduated high school, and I was like writing this sci-fi where people like ran around and like, kicked butt and stuff. And it was when I was in my first fiction class, and he said, like, our instructor challenged us to write something grounded in reality, like right now in this moment. And that's when I first started writing, and the places that I was returning to were like gas stations along the way to home, or they were like, I was very interested in like a checkout clerk and her day to day, and like what type of customers she was getting and what people were buying, because in those spaces they're so it's kind of like an airport. Like people are coming in and out all the time. Like it's a transition space. And I feel like so much story happens in this in spaces that are ordinary. And so yeah. Writing about that.
I love that. I love that about the Missing Morning Stars so much. And like, yeah, the grocery store, like that's there's so much potential for meeting your teacher. So I want to talk a little bit too about, you know, you have such a range. So you didn't like just write characters that are you. Like there are some writers they mostly will write just characters that are just direct reflections of themselves. And some of those books I absolutely love, but you're not, I don't think you're a writer who's necessarily doing just like the direct, like this is me, but a different version. Like you are able to write people who are very much unlike you, it seems like in some ways. And so I'm wondering, how do you, when you sit down to create a character, like what does that feel like for you? Is it a process of like you're going through and you're imagining them step by step, or do they kind of come to you fully formed? I'm always fascinated by writers and the way that they come to character.
Yeah. They typically come to me with like their voiciness, or like typically I usually hear a voice before I even get an idea of what the character looks like. And I just really like imagining like mostly like how they talk, like what's their cadence, like what's their outlook on life, and then from there I kind of build a body around them, I don't know, to house them and all of their thoughts, particularly with like Leo, one of my characters. His voice was just so strong and so distinct, that I don't know, I'd like find myself asking him like, what do you think of this? Because he has very different perspective of like death and mourning and grief than I do. And so that's kind of how I approach my characters. I just kind of take their voice and build around them.
Oh, I love that you were like asking him, like, what do you think about this? Like you could feel that, that sort of relationship you have with them. So the Missing Morning Star, also one of the things I greatly admired about it, and I'm a writer who's in love with place-based writing. I love reading things that teach me something new about a place that I'm from, or allow me to access a place that I've never been to. And your book really brought me back to a time when I was teaching at Fort Lewis. And a lot of my students were from Tuba City, and they would talk about going home. And then like I went to the Northern Nations Fair on the weekend with my friend from India, and nobody knew which language to speak to us in. And like, yeah, like they're just like, we don't know who these girls are and like what's going on. And like your book really brought me back to a lot of those spaces in the Navajo Nation. But you also like have some characters that are far off, like in Houston. Like you would never think that like, okay, now we're going to go to Texas. We're going to go not only to Texas, we're going to Houston. And one of my favorite passages is from Conception, and it's Roanna's talking about being on the airplane. And I'm going to read it because it's just so lovely. I want everyone to hear it. Most folks had closed their window shades up tight, but I enjoyed the dying evening light, watching the sun slowly fade over the earth and all her rivers, ranges, and tributaries. From up this high in the sky, I could see the curve of the horizon. Flying over the earth, everything was exposed. Her round belly scarred with patchwork fields, all in various stages of growth. Glistening white veins of rivers' fingers sliced across her surface from the crown of the horizon to her navel. As the sun sank down beyond the horizon and the line set aglow and everything slowly darkened, I thought of my future belly. Okay, I'm sorry. Is that weird for me to read to you in your own words?
No.
It's just so beautiful. And the book is filled, the collection is just filled with descriptions of land like this. And so I wanted to hear you talk about your relationship to your homelands as an Indigenous writer. And what does it mean to write about place to you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think writing about place is leaving not leaving anything like unturned. So like I'm looking under everything and I'm trying to figure out how to make it um beautiful or help people see it in the way that I do. So like I think that some of the time I would hear from people in passing, they're like, oh yeah, I drove through the reservation. It wasn't very like there's just nothing there. It's not beautiful. And so I didn't really want to give people a chance to be like, oh, this place is not beautiful. And so I kind of took very strong authorial custody and I was just like, no, it is beautiful from the shattered glass to the crumpled up aluminum cans, because I feel like that space is kind of like it just illustrates like everything over time. So like the deeper that you dig, the more you know about the people that have been there, or that have been living there since time immemorial. Yeah, I I think.
I bring this up a lot because I'm a professor too. And, some of my students say place doesn't matter. And then I get like real passionate and I'm like, no, place is everything. Like place is my family, place matters, and I hope I don't freak them out. And she's like, here she goes again, talking about how place is so important. But I think you don't do it in a way that ever feels like me, like in the classroom saying, no, this is so important. Like, it's just like it's just a natural part of your character's being. And I think it's so important. And I love it. And it reminded me of being in a place that feels like home to me. And I'm in Texas right now. And so it's there's some places that look like that, but not the way that your book does. So yeah. I want to thank you because it feels so good to be able to read.
I just wanted to add something to that. There was also like this article that I read for my thesis. And it was talking about how with Indigenous people, we are indivisible from our land. And like the land is very much us and our bodies. And I feel like just like that passage that you read, like that we are all of our scars. We are all of the patchwork fields and the things that we've experienced through our lives. And once you get up high enough, that can all be beautiful. But yeah, in my culture, oh, I'm gonna get really choked up. Like I'm very indivisible from the land. Like my mother buried my umbilical cord, like in Kayenta. And I think for the rest of my life, I will feel that umbilical cord pull and bring me home. And when I'm there, I feel like I belong there and my body recognizes that I belong there. And so I just wanted my characters to feel that too. Like I want in them to be like imbued with this immense love for their home. Or if there's not an immense love, the challenge of like, why don't I have this immense love for home? Yeah. So I just wanted to add that.
You're making me tear up too, because I'm like, now I'm all sad for home. I want to go home. And like even the first line of the whole collection, it's just like it's so fascinating. Like I was taught from a young age that the earth was sacred. Yet every 2 weeks or so, I'd back my little truck up to the edge of the divergent dam and throw our garbage into the gorge below. Like I was just like, what am I getting into? This is amazing. What is this book? And it's like the honesty too, the honesty about the land. And like, we're doing this to the land, but also we are the land. And like, so that means we're doing this to ourselves. So, I think it's really beautiful. And I just love being able to feel that from other writers, because sometimes it's so lonely and you're out here trying to tell people like, promise me, it's so important how we treat the earth is a reflection of how we treat ourselves. So I also want to talk about, you deal with some really heavy topics and you don't shy away from them. There are things in this book like ruminating on death, suicide, legacies of colonialism and attempted genocide. And you do it in a way that I think it's so brave. Like you're willing to look at it head on. You don't shy away from it. And I think sometimes there's there's like a desire for people to look away, like don't see the thing that is hard or difficult. But the Missing Morning Star doesn't do that. It makes the reader look at the thing that is happening. And so I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about your choice to do that. Also, the ways you take care of yourself as a writer when you're working on these kinds of these deeper, darker subject matter. And, you know, I just think it's really brave. So I just wanted to say that. And there's a question in there.
Yeah. I think that part of writing about like settler colonization in my short story collection is that I feel like some of the stories are very symptomatic of it. Like it's this larger structure that is impacting my characters, and the way that they live their lives. And so a lot of the times I kind of compared it to the Odyssey, like Homer's The Odyssey, because it's like us indigenous people, we go out into this world, and like even though it's not like Poseidon and all of these evil monstrous creatures that are trying to literally like kill us, it's this larger structure, it's this history, and that can be so that can feel very damning as an indigenous person. And so part of the research that I did when like considering how are ways that we can circumvent this, or what are the ways that indigenous people can resurge against this larger structure, and one of them that I found was like, just stay home, like don't leave. Just stay home, don't leave, or protect home as often as you can, talk about home, be involved. So that's kind of what I tried to make my characters do. They are trying to get home. Yeah. But there's 1,000 reasons that could stop them from getting home, but they do get home, or they're already there and they're not leaving. And then your second question was, I don't remember your second question.
I think, well, one of the questions was like, you know, how do you write, like after writing a scene that, you know, makes me as a reader cry, that's really, and then I get to close the book and walk away. I'm not the creator of that. And so I'm wondering, how do you, like, are you able to just close the computer and walk away and like wipe that out? Or are there things you do to kind of take away from, okay, now I'm in one space and that's the creation space, but now I want to be in a healthier space? Because I have to think about those things too when I write. Like, how do I transfer the different energies of myself?
Yeah. I think in Layli Long Soldier's poem Dilate, she says everything happens through the body, and it appears very beautifully on the page. But I think about that a lot when I'm writing to try to like help it go through my body. Like so I can feel and meet that grief and reconcile it while I'm writing. And then like also there are times where I do need to take intense self-care after writing a scene or something that might cut really close to my own heart personally. And so I'm just like more gentle with myself during those things, or I try not to demand like perfection from those scenes and allow them to be as they are. And I like to think of it as a way, like writing these things that are difficult, it's been incredibly healing for me. Not everything in the book, but some of the things I have like experienced myself as an Indigenous body going through the world. And so writing about them was incredibly cathartic and helped me come to a deeper understanding about them, and helped me heal parts of myself that were really sensitive around these topics. So I think that just going in with full intention when you're writing, and allowing yourself to stop if it does get too heavy, and feeling it through your body, and not bottling it up. Like that's the practice, is getting it down.
I think that's so important. Like you can stop, like you can walk away, like you don't have to hurt yourself further to get it out. Like you can take breaks. And I think that's so important that you mentioned that. I want to remind the audience too that you can send in questions in the Q&A tab at the bottom, and we're collecting those, and I'll ask those in about 10 minutes. So I just want to remind everybody to please send those in. We're excited to hear from you as well. So this is a question I would get a lot about my first book, Sabrina and Karina. People would be like, do you have a favorite story? Do you have a favorite character? And then I'd be like, these are all my kids. Like, what are you talking about? I made them all. But I'm going to ask you because I do want to know, like, do you have a favorite story or one that stands out above the others for the writing experience? And if not, like, that's a perfectly acceptable answer. But I just want to know, like, what was it like actually, like, the individual stories, getting in there and working with them?
Yeah. So my favorite story, or the story that's my favorite this week, the one that I connect to the most, is Wool Dolls. It's a story about a mother and a daughter, and the daughter is trying to become a woman because she is unable to have her womanhood ceremony. And so she goes through these different processes of being like promiscuous and trying to find herself and being like, I'm a woman now, all at her mom's, like, I don't know, her mom's really like, don't do that, like, this is overwhelming. And I think in that character, I just really, I don't know, I don't want to say I see a lot of myself in her because I'm like, she is dramatic.
Yeah.
But maybe she is very similar to myself. But in that character, I think I just really enjoyed her unabashedness and like her I don't know, enjoyment in like telling little white lies or just like making things up. I found her really interesting and intriguing. And then also just like writing in that immense love for her mother, this complicated relationship with your mother. And especially in my experiences being a indigenous daughter, eldest daughter of a family, like, your mother, she loves you so fiercely that sometimes you feel indivisible from her.
Yeah.
But then you want to go out and you want to express yourself, and like the whole time it's like trying to hold, like, I don't know, hold a moth in your hands. It's so difficult. And so I just really wanted to capture that fierce love between a mother and a daughter, and that it doesn't always look the same. Like, I don't know, some people are like, I'm best friends with my mom and I talk to her every single day and we're doing these things. I don't feel like love needs to be that, like, that explicit. I think it can be subtle. I think it can be innate and more unspoken. So
Yeah.
that's that. The process of writing that story was really fun. For the other stories, I think with like conception, it was wondering a lot about indigenous women and like reproduction. And like, I am now a married woman, and the idea of having children, it's always been very anxiety inducing for me, like, since I was a child, because I was like, well, if I marry someone who's not in my tribe, I have to think about blood quantum. And it was just this dreadful feeling. So there is a lot of baggage that I feel like indigenous women take into their relationships. And it's like, is my relationship honoring my ancestors? And like this broad range of questions. And so I thought extensively about this woman just being so baby hungry and not being able to have a baby and just being obsessive about it. And coming up with this convoluted plan.
Yeah.
I just thought it was really interesting. I'm like, I will never do that, but it's
Yeah.
go ahead, Roanna. Like,
Yeah.
But yeah, like, all of the stories were immensely fun to write, except for maybe Dormant. Dormant was, I don't know why it was so hard for me to write. Just the scenes with like Erin, the teacher that the main character Bernadine has a relationship with. I don't know, like the them flirting and it kind of being against my own moral compass of like this older individual dating and finding interest in a younger individual. I that was incredibly challenging for me to write. but the whole collection kind of has that, but that one was the most difficult.
Yeah. Oh, that's fascinating because I mean, it does have this like ick factor that I was like, she's going there. She's writing this way. He's also like, in some ways, he's like every fly fishing white guy guide that like I've ever flirted with, you know. I was just like, and even though I'm not, you know, a teenage girl anymore, I was like, it made me reflect on myself. And I think I think that's also why it's a little hard, like, because it makes you think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Good one. they're all so good, and they're all so strong, and every character has like this pulsating life force that I'm so excited to like continue to watch your career and to continue to see the kinds of characters that you put onto the page for us. I have a few more questions before we go into the audience Q&A. So you went to IAI, and I, like, as a little kid, I went to a summer camp and I studied with the Navajo photographer Will Wilson. Do you know who that is? Or so
I
like
don't. I feel like I should though.
so the Institute of American Indian Arts was like hosting this like Indigenous kid summer camp in Denver, and it was like the first time that I ever like found like that was good in an art form, and it transformed my life. Like I became like a little photographer kid, and of course his pictures were like of sheep, like his were like different than my city pictures, and I'm just really curious of like, how was your time in the MFA program there? Like, what was it like with your working with your mentors and like your classmates? And I would just love to hear about getting your MFA there.
Yeah. So I started the program in 2019, and COVID happened in the middle of it. And so it was a low residency program. And so we ended up not having, I think, our last 3 residencies. We did have a graduation residency, but we had about like a year and a half to kind of make connections with our mentors and with my cohort and stuff. And I loved that program. It was so great. Like, it was the first time in my life, because I live in northern Utah and I'm incredibly close with my mom. Like, I like to be near her. If I'm far from her, I get like sad. But I'm close to my mom. And it was the first time that I was being workshopped completely by other Native writers. My mentors were all Native, and so there was this opportunity that it lent me to really like break down a lot of what I thought like Native literature was about. I think that our director at the time, Santi Frazier, he said, rewrite the literary landscape. And I was like, okay, let's go. Like, I'm gonna take my pen, we're gonna do this. So it was great because like I could ask my peers and my mentors like what they thought of scenes. And particularly one of my experiences with Tiana, she wrote This Is Paradise, and she is a Tanaka Maui author. And she was like, Stacie, you need to pull back on this authorial custody because you're not letting people like make their own reach their own conclusions about certain things. And I was like, she's right. And so I got to a point where I didn't feel like I had to explain things as much. Like, I would put Navajo in my book and I'd be like, I don't need to translate that. If somebody wants to translate it, they can do the work. So it was incredibly empowering to be around such talented Native people and such impressive mentors who opened up doors for me and were so generous and gracious, and that hasn't always been my experience in programs. So literally I recommend it to everyone. When I graduated, I cried. I was like, I can't say that I go there anymore. I can just say I'm an alum. But yeah, it was one of the best experiences that I've had in education, so highly recommend. Go there, people.
Oh, that makes me so, I love that for you. Like, I love like having like a good educational experience, because it's like so many of us come from just some negative, bad education experiences early on. And I think it's so nice to hear that you just felt so nurtured there. I also saw recently that you were at UCross in Wyoming. Have you done residencies before UCross, or is this your?
This was my first residency.
Okay. I would love to
Yeah.
hear about did you feel like a residency helped you, and how did it go for you?
Yeah. So it was my first residency since like my MFA program. I graduated in 2021. And it was so generative. I loved it. Like, I liked going out into Wyoming in the middle of nowhere. There's just like a field and like all these cows, and at night all you could hear was the crickets. And it was very reminiscent of home and just like the quietness there. So I was able to get a lot done while I was there for my next project that I'm working on. And like I think the benefit of residencies is they take you away from where you are, and I feel like that kind of unlocks another part of your brain where you can imagine like what is life like here, or like I wonder what the experiences are of like the people on the taco bus that we bought tacos from in like a hardware store parking lot. Like what are these experiences? And I just like how it like just cracks my head open like a little egg, and I'm just like, let's sizzle, let's figure it out. Let's come up with new stories.
I love that. And you met artists, I take it, from like all over the country and things like that.
Yeah, like visual artists, dancers, musicians, and just seeing how I don't know, our art incorporated with each other's, and just the conversations that we had were so enriching. And I think it's unique to look at their modalities, and we're all doing such similar things, just in different forms. And I think that's great. One of my colleagues there was a dancer, and I found myself like in my own studio, like moving around and being like, how would I describe this movement, or the movement that he did? Like it was so unique. So I don't know. I like it because it just loosens up the brain.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I love that. And I think it's like you did mention it. So what's next? Like, what are you working on now?
Yeah.
I know you have a book coming out literally tomorrow. So if you don't want to say
yeah,
that, it's okay.
yeah, I don't know. So I live very close to the Intermountain Indian School in Brigham City, Utah. Like it's just like I think 25 minutes away through the canyon. And when I learned about this school, I was definitely intrigued, because I was like, how come I haven't heard about this before? And so I'm kind of exploring a group of 3 friends attending the Intermountain Indian School in like 1982. And there's I think it's actually a horror novel.
Cool.
Or there's horror elements. And there's a dark entity living in the bowels of the school because it used to be a military hospital. And the students need to figure out what it is. And they use their friendship and their traditional ways to kind of banish this like dark spirit from the school. So yeah.
I'm the first to pre-order. So let me know when it's ready. Oh my God, I love that. I love like group hijinks in a haunted setting. So especially in a literary haunted setting. Oh, I can't wait. So I think we got like a lot of questions between us, and now I'm seeing like there's a ton from the audience. So I think it's like kind of time that I start asking their questions. But thank you so much, Stacie. I'm not leaving. I'm just going to start asking other people's questions now, but thank you. Okay. So question 1 is, which books did you read to influence the writing for The Missing Morningstar?
Oh, wow. That's my cousin. He asked a really good question. Okay. I read a lot of Louise Erdrich, and I read like Stephen Graham Jones, a lot of Native writers. It was incredibly it's almost not as hard for me to write these things as it is for me to read these things. I find that I have to get through these books very like slowly, just because everything in there is so good, and I just have to process what's going on. also Tommy Orange, Lucia Berlin, Clairvaux Watkins, like just a lot of writers in the West, and Native writers. That's who I read, and they're just brilliant.
That's a good list. I think we have like, it's always funny because sometimes like you'll get asked that question and you'll like, it'll be like the end of the whole session. You're like, I've never read a book in my life, but that was a good, like, it's just, sometimes it's like hard to pull them out when you don't have them in front of you. But yeah, so everybody write down that list. That's what you read next after The Missing Morningstar. Okay. So audience question 2. I love this because I want to hear what you think about this. So as a writer, would you call your diction your own unique diction, or maybe more broadly, what makes your voice as a writer?
Yeah. I wouldn't say that my diction is unique. A lot of the diction and the way that I describe things are usually expanded out of things that my mother would say. Like she would just say something interesting and I just want to figure out how to build around it. Like in The Sheep is a Body of Knowledge, she described the pelvis of the sheep appearing like a butterfly. If you look at it vertically like this. So if you're looking down and it appears like this, and I just thought that was so poetic in the way that my mom described it. So I think that it leans more into I think, I don't know who coined the term, but it's Denetics. So like Dene aesthetics. I think I leaned into those Dene aesthetics because our language is so descriptive and specific. So I wouldn't say that it's unique to myself. I think that it's unique to Dene people. And then just other things around growing up in an area that has a predominant religion. Like I live around a lot of Latter-day Saint people. Like I think I kind of pulled from some of that. When there wasn't like firm cussing, it was like shoot instead of, the other one. Yeah. So like, I don't know, just a lot of borrowing, but I'm sure that I make it unique because I put it in my book.
Yeah. No, I love that. I love the idea too of like how you're influenced by your language and like that comes out in your descriptions. That's really beautifully worded. Okay, so we have another question, and this is from Rebecca. It's the only question so far that has a name, but some of the other ones are going to have names. Okay, Rebecca wants to know, how do you decide how much of tribal tradition to share with your readers, some of whom will be non-native? As a native writer, this is something I go back and forth on. I want to educate, but still give our traditions the reverence they're due. Thanks. I really love your books. Okay. Oh, you're welcome. Okay, go. Yeah, I'm like, sorry. I'm like, go on. I want to know your answer too, because I'm actually struggling with something like very like right now. So I want to know what you have to say about this.
Yeah. I think that the way that I write it is I think of my ideal reader, and I think that there's definitely I think it was when I read I don't remember what book by Nella Larson. I cannot find it, but we're just going to say Nella Larson. And she's describing this scene, and like encoded within the scene is so much like rich stuff that I'm sure that you could glean as like a BIPOC person, but then probably even more as like an African American person. I think that that's kind of how I handle like some of my cultural traditions in there, is that people who aren't going to understand aren't going to get it 100%. And that's okay. Because I keep it vague enough, but those who know, it's encoded in there for them, and they will understand that a little bit more deeply. And then just like more explicitly for specific scenes, like in my story Under the Porchway, I think there's also just like, never underestimate the power of saying no. Like no is like is a full answer. So one of my not mentors, but one of my instructors early on wanted me to describe kind of what the main character experiences during his ceremony, and I just told him flat out no, like that's not the place for this, like this is not part of the ceremony that he's experiencing, and I don't need to explain that. So yeah, I try to encode what I can for my main reader, and then yeah, I just tell people no.
Yeah. I mean, I love that. I think that's so important. I think so you have a main reader. And so who can you describe like who the main reader is to you?
Yeah, so like I don't know, my main reader or ideal reader, I don't like that word, but main reader is a young Navajo person either living on or off the reservation, and who is probably, I don't know, anywhere from like 15 to like my age. I don't know. So that's like my ideal reader. Because I feel like there's so many experiences that are not unique to me, that I just wanted to put out there for other people to be like, yeah, I've experienced that. And like, I know what that feels like, or there are situations I've been in that are similar.
Yeah. Okay, we have a question. This one has no name. This is Q4. Firstly, I really love your stories. They're what I needed growing up, and I'm so grateful that they're here now for me and others to read. Second, I have a question about your writing process and routine. I wanted to get into writing rhythm, and I'm wondering if you have any advice on best practices. Thank you.
Yeah. So that's a great question. Related to schooling. I feel like schooling puts you in this schedule to be like, yeah, I have to write because there's an assignment due, and you get a lot done. And then after you graduate, it can be really difficult to catch that cadence again. But I think that you just need to decide. I don't know. I think that there was like this quote that I read once that was like, a pianist needs to play the piano like to feel good in their life, and a writer needs to do it too. And once I decided that like when I'm writing, I feel like the most, I don't know, the highest level of myself, or I feel, I don't know, I just feel extra me when I'm writing. So I think it's mostly just a decision of like, can I set aside this time for myself, because it's therapeutic for me too. I do it for my own healing. So that's kind of, once I was able to switch that perspective in my head, it became a lot easier for me to set a time and write, where before, like, no chance. Like, if I graduated, there's no way I'm writing again. It's just over.
Yeah.
Which is so bad. But I think that's kind of what Western education can get you into, is like, you do it for an assignment, you do it for a grade, and there's so much like positive feedback or negative feedback, but either way it's feedback and your brain gets addicted to it. But building in those little rewards for yourself, and determining that it's of value to yourself.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. I love that you feel like your best self or your highest self. And I'm going to share that with my students, because I think that I want to make sure that they continue to write after they graduate. And I think it's important to hear that like you will be your better version of you if you continue. Okay, this next question is from Marissa and Michelle and Red Cherries in Tirado. And congrats on your book, all caps. Okay. Did you ever receive feedback or comments from readers that wanted you to write toward a larger non-Indigenous audience in the name of accessibility? And if so, how do you navigate this in your writing and publishing process?
Oh, that's a great question, Marissa and Michaela. I think you'll have to come to our panel at AWP to hear our thoughts on that. But yeah, I think early on I went to a school that is predominantly white. It's like, I think it's like 89%. And there wasn't a lot of diversity in my school, so a lot of my stories were being read by people unlike me. And at first I gave them like as much as I could, like I spelled everything out for them. And I would get feedback and stuff, and it didn't always feel good. Like I felt kind of yucky sometimes, or certain things felt like voyeuristic, and I didn't like it. And so I think that when I identified my ideal reader or my main reader, I just tried to tailor it more towards them and be like, they're gonna get more out of this than maybe the predominant readers in general. Yeah. So that's how I did that. It's not eloquent, but
well, thank you, Marissa and Michaela. instead of that's how you say her name, Michaela, or their name. Okay. Q6. How did you decide which stories to include in the collection? And did you push a couple of darlings off until the next book?
Hi, Conley. This is my MFA buddy. Yeah, so the stories that I chose, there were like definitely 2 stories from my thesis at IA that I did not include because they didn't necessarily fit. One of them was just badly written. And then the other one was actually the piece that I'm working on now, like turning that into a novel. So the story about the Intermountain Indian School, that story just requires a lot more thought and grace and research, and I just wanted to invest a lot more time in doing that. So yes, I did have to push a couple of darlings off. And then stories to include into my book, especially with Reservation State of Mind, like I wrote that I think when I was like 20 or like 21, and I was really nervous about putting that in, but it was one of the first stories that showed me that I could be a writer. And this story got me into my MFA program in IA. And so I think of it as the story that opened doors for me. And so I was like, it has to be in there. Like my collection wouldn't be my collection without it. So, but the rest of the stories, I just knew I had to have them in this book.
Oh, I love that. Like somebody once told me, they were like, you have to read this one particular story if you ever do a reading, because that's like, you're like a virgin if you're Madonna. Like it's the one that made it happen. And so I love that you respect that story like that. Like this is the story that gave you this. I love that. This next question is about your book cover. Jessica says, the cover of your book is really unique and beautiful. Were you involved in the process of designing it?
Yeah, Tory House was like, what do you want? And I told them. So there's a Dene photographer named Tiana Arvizo on Instagram, and I've been following her pretty much since I like started being on Instagram. And I love all of her photographs. They're of like the Southwest. A lot of photos are taken on the reservation. And there's just sort of this, she has this like whimsical element to her photographs, but they're also like, I don't know, aren't like whimsical and gritty like antithesis of each other. I don't know. Either way, they were so ethereal and gritty at the same time, and I loved that. And I feel like they really capture the Southwest in like the starkness that is in the desert, but also in the vibrance that it is. And I feel like it was reflective of my story. So Catherine, the one who made my cover, tracked down the image that's on the cup on here through Tiana's feed, and that became what this is now. And so that's how I was involved. And if you want to buy prints from Tiana, like you can just look her up on Instagram.
Awesome. I have one more question for you before we're out of time, and that's tomorrow. Like, what is your plan? Like, are you going to a bookstore like first thing? Like, what is your plan for your pub day?
Yeah, so tomorrow is my pub day, and I'm honestly just going to be very chill and just do my daily life. And then on Wednesday, I am having a book signing in Colorado at Maria's bookshop. And so that's kind of like the real in the race car aspect of the launch day that I'm considering.
Okay, yeah. Awesome. I can't wait for you to see. You haven't seen your book in a bookstore yet, right? or have? Okay,
No.
I cannot wait. Let me know how it feels. I'm so excited for you. I'm so excited for the readers who get to experience your beautiful book. Go out, get a copy of The Missing Morningstar. Thank you so much, Stacie, for talking with me.
Thank you so much for launching me, Kali. Like I just imagined like you launching me out of the cannon, but I thought that might be weird, so I didn't say
several
that
cannons.
anywhere.
There are going to be several launchers.
Awesome. Well, on behalf of everybody who got to be here for this canon escapade, thank you so much to both of you. As Kali said, you can order The Missing Morningstar and other stories at toryhouse.org. You can hit your local favorite indie bookstore to pick up Woman of Light and Kali's short story collection, Sabrina and Karina. You have a lot of great reading ahead, and thank you everyone for such a delightful evening. Kali, Stacie, thanks so much, and Stacie, congratulations.
Bye guys, thank you. Bye.
Thank you for coming. Bye.